My name is David Johnson. I'm the executive director of True Chicago, and we've been doing once a month workshop sessions that we will invite just some specialists, some experts, some just people that are really ahead in their craft to spend some time with us, and really just to school us on what it's like to be in their shoes, and hopefully even answer some questions. So this is something that we have really jumped into as a result of what's happened with the pandemic, and as well as the social and racial unrest that we've experienced. And really, it's one of those things where we have found this moment's disruption has created a lot of opportunity. And one of the opportunities is just to have folks join virtually and have a moment where we can talk with some incredible people that, you know, before we would have just been thinking this is only possible in person. So we're excited to do this with you guys. Let's do this. Let's start with, as people are joining in here, let's start with just letting the chat know where you guys are jumping on from. If you're here in Chicago or if you're out of state somewhere, go ahead and throw it in the chat where you guys are joining from, just so we can just get a sense of where everybody's coming from, which is always, I think, just an exciting thing to know. I see that there's folks that are joining us from all over Chicago, and I know we also have some folks joining from California as well. So yeah, and if you're Chicago, you can feel free to even put the neighborhood if you want. So yeah, see, we have Detroit in the house. We even have Detroit in the house. This is great. I know you guys already know, and that's part of why you're here, is we are having a special guest today, and that's Natalie Moore. She's honestly, I was telling her before, I've been excited about this because she's someone that I have followed for a long time, specifically on WBEZ, Chicago's NPR radio station, and just always enjoy what she brings, what she writes. But beyond that, I think she's just an important voice, and an increasingly important voice in journalism, specifically from Chicago, specifically speaking on behalf of some of Chicago's Black and brown spaces. And so really, you know, hearing from her today is, it's weird. And I haven't said this to you before, Natalie, but every time I have listened to one of your pieces on NPR or WBEZ, I feel like I'm listening to somebody report who's like one of my cousins or something. It feels like I'm hearing from somebody who would be in my family who has something to say about, you know, specifically the South Side. Or so, I mean, Natalie, if you guys aren't already familiar, she is someone who reports for WBZ and NPR, but also she has written a book called The South Side that if you have not checked out, you need to pick up and read. Really just gives you a lay of the land as far as the history and how specifically the South Side of Chicago has become what it is today, and what's become of some of the history and how it's affected people who wound up coming even from the South in the Great Migration and settling on the South Side of Chicago, and how that has even created the landscape that we see today. So I could go on, but welcome, Natalie. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to have you. And I also want to introduce Bianca Lackings, who is going to be sort of guiding us through this time. Bianca has really been with True Chicago since we started out. She started, really, you've played like every possible role at True Chicago. You've gone from attendee to volunteer to team member. Now you really are helping us just with moments like this where we're talking to some of our key people. And so Bianca also runs a page called Unlearn That you should go check out if you have not and follow, where she breaks down a lot of important things and stereotypes that people need to unlearn. So welcome, Bianca. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, David. Love it. Excited.
Yeah. So really this time I want to allow you guys to kind of go at it and have a conversation. And throughout this time, I would love, this is honestly, some of these times we have not sought to make these huge moments. I would say at the beginning of this, we really pushed to, get 100 people in a Zoom and talk. And we've had some challenges with that in the past. So we've really wanted to make these more like conversations and more moments that we could just kind of talk together. And we posted on our YouTube page, and if people want to check it out after. But because of that conversation vibe, I would love if any of you guys are here joining us, have questions as we go. Both Bianca and I can kind of field them and we can talk about them. So feel free to throw those in the chat. So go for it, Bianca.
Awesome. Well, hello again. Well, hi, everyone. And hello again, Miss Natalie. So excited to talk to you about so many things. So first, just to open things up, how have you been? How are you doing in this pivotal moment? I think that everyone's having, just in the middle of a pandemic, a movement, just countless things. How are you?
Thanks for asking. That's a question that I always try to ask people first before I'm interviewing them or engaging in any kind of community Zoom conversation. So today, I'm fine. There are days that are tougher than others. Been doing a lot of COVID reporting and deaths in Black and Latino communities and talking to loved ones. We have a big series that's launching on that next week. So being in the middle of that and hearing about Black death and then George Floyd and what was happening in Chicago, like it was rough. But this is my job, something that I complain about, but you have to give yourself breaks. And then on top of that, the anxiety of living in a pandemic and hoping that I and my loved ones and my family stay safe. So some days I'm worried, other days I'm just trying to get through. So it's really a day by day situation.
Yeah. Absolutely. As a journalist and this, just a reporter, a writer, but also someone who is greatly impacted by the things that you write about and the things you're reporting, how are you kind of balancing that?
Taking some days off, vacations are canceled, not going anywhere, and they want us to use our vacation time. So sometimes, having a 3-day weekend, or just trying to break up the week, and taking it's not even just vacation, it's comp time. Cooking, I feel like I have gained the COVID-19, all this baking that goes on.
Yeah.
And, trying to talk on Zoom with friends who don't live here. I've started not loosening, but, I'm playing tennis. When things first started opening up, I was like, I'm gonna let other folks test the waters. I wasn't anxious to jump back in right away, but I have been out the house a lot more, going to local restaurants, sitting outside, trying to do my part to help the economy. Every Friday we order takeout from a restaurant that's our little contribution, or, you know, try to buy things from small businesses to keep them afloat. So, you know, there's a little extra money because there was less gas money being spent earlier. You know, some bills were decreased because you're at home.
Right. That's awesome. Great. Okay. Well, just to kind of take it back, would you mind introducing yourself and kind of like how you got on the scene as a journalist, when you knew you wanted to be a journalist or reporter?
I'm from Chicago and went to Chicago public schools and knew very early that I wanted to be a journalist. I worked on my high school paper. I went to Morgan Park. I was editor of that paper. I was unusually focused starting at around age 13, and did a summer program in journalism each year. Went to Howard for undergrad, was editor of the school paper there, did internships, came back to Chicago and went to grad school at Northwestern. And yeah, just kept on a path. I see that Lawrence from Detroit. I used to work at the Detroit News. I've worked in Minnesota, and I've been at WBEZ since 2007.
Okay, awesome. And then when did you, because Chicago seems to be a very important and persistent lane that you work in and talk about, when did you kind of decide that you wanted to come back to Chicago, talk about Chicago, and focus in on like segregation in Chicago?
I always wanted my career to be in Chicago because I'm from here, my family's here, and I think there's something terrific about being able to report on your hometown and the issues that I care about in other cities, you know, housing, economic development, neighborhoods. So I've always been in the urban, or tried to be in the urban affairs lane. And yeah, I got the job at WBEZ, and that's what, that was the job that I got to report in Chicago.
Okay, awesome. And then can you tell us a little bit about your book, The South Side?
So I joke that it's my dissertation for working at WBEZ at that point for almost 10 years. I had been covering, I felt like the elephant in the room was segregation, that all roads led to that when we're talking about issues plaguing the city, whether it's housing or violence or food access. But it's not something that people really wanted to talk about. It was something that was accepted, like, oh, Chicago's segregated, and not understanding that was the common denominator. And there's tons of academic work that's done on this, so I wasn't trying to, there really wasn't anything new to say, but, you know, getting people who weren't reading the scholarly work and then using my own story and family story to get those points across.
Okay, great. And then when it comes down to just, can you speak a little bit about segregation in Chicago, just to, you know, kind of inform people of what this looks like? Because I know I heard, I think I watched an interview, I think it was from like 2015 that you did with PBS, and you were just kind of talking about how, like you're saying, segregation is this issue and it's kind of the elephant in the room, and it's where a lot of these things are stemming from, but people sort of dismiss it almost in Chicago. It's like we know it's here and we know it's happening, but we don't know the weight of it.
Well, it's all deliberate. Sometimes people think, oh, people just want to live around people like them. Well, Black neighborhoods are Black neighborhoods on purpose. There was white flight. There were restrictive covenants. There was redlining, all these host of policies in the 20th century that helped create the way, not just Chicago, but Detroit, St. Louis, Philadelphia, you know, a lot of cities in the Midwest and the Northeast. And understanding that housing policy and how to use, and then that turns into segregation for schools. And this isn't about wanting to have diverse neighbors just for the sake of kumbaya. It's about power and resources and neglect that comes when you have segregation.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say is the importance of kind of educating about that and people knowing where this comes from and how deliberate it was for these communities to be segregated?
You know, this isn't taught in schools. I do think in the past decade, there's been a broader conversation about segregation on the local level, on the national level, and housing really being at the cornerstone of that. And how can you improve communities if you don't know the history, if you don't know the policies? And policies tend to repeat themselves. So, you know, today segregation may not look like, okay, well, we're going to deny people housing based on race. There's other, you can talk about affordable housing or where resources go, or how there's, you know, in Chicago, I think there's a lot of literal and figurative gated communities in the West Loop, River North, where you don't have diversity of housing, much less diversity of people who are living there. And so what kind of policies can make the city inclusive for everyone? The thing is that there shouldn't be barriers to anyone in the community. You should be able to have mobility. If you have a Section 8 voucher, you shouldn't only have to live in, if you want to live in Inglewood, that's great, but you should be able to have other options as well. And it's about removing the barriers that exist.
Yeah, and kind of speaking to that idea and this barrier and opportunity idea, I also heard you say something else that I really liked, which was you speak on race issues, and a lot of people try and say this is a class issue, but you're speaking specifically to the fact that this is a race issue. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I say that race and class are first cousins, but my analysis is squarely rooted in race, because you can be a six-figure earning household in a Black neighborhood and still not have a grocery store, or still have undervalued property. So, you know, things can be worse if you're lower income. I'm not saying that they're always equal, but you're not immune just because you have more money.
Right. That's great. So right now, I know a lot of people are in this space of, with this entire movement going on, especially a lot of people were almost initially shell-shocked. I know some were, maybe people outside of the community, people within the community are, you know, at this point of being exhausted, and you're just trying to, you know, work through what's going on, work through maybe what you've been through and where you're trying to go and how this all applies. What advice would you give to specifically young Black people right now trying to navigate their voice at a time like this, or trying to develop their lane?
Are you talking about young Black people who want to be creative and document, or is that in what manner?
Yeah, so so specifically, I guess, young Black creatives who want to, I guess this, me and David were actually talking about this, the importance of being able to articulate and finding your voice and being able to use that for impact, and to, you know, speak to people in such an emotional moment. So how would you speak to that?
If you're a photographer, I would shoot in the neighborhoods that you live in. If you're a poet, reflect the times. I would say just do your craft, no matter what it is. And where you feel like there's a void or something missing, that's an opportunity for you to write about that, document that, shine a light on that. There are existing platforms, so you don't have to wait for someone to hire you. You know, if you're just using photography as an example, you have Instagram, where there's so much great photography that's there. So, you know, I think overall finding the voice is seeing what you think is perhaps missing. Because this is a vast city. You know, I joke that I'm the Southside Lois Lane, but I'm certainly not in every single community all the time, reflecting every single thing that that is going on. So I think there's room for people to do their work and show representation, and you get better by practice. You know, whether that's getting internships or finding a mentor or getting an apprenticeship, depending on your age and your level, and I'm not sure where everyone is in life or their age, but you get better by doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I jump in? I just want to say something to that. I mean, because part of what we were talking about was, I think a lot of, especially young people of color, starting with, what happened with Ahmaud Arbery, and then, going on through Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I think there was like this mounting pressure for young Black people, especially young Black people that live around non-Black people, almost felt this pressure to like express something and like make their own personal public statement of some sort. And whether or not that was warranted, that was the feeling. And I think a lot of people were like, every young Black person I knew actually was drafting something. Mm-hmm. And it was like this moment where it was like, shoot, I wish I knew how to write. And I think that there is this big thing of like what you were saying of everybody is in their own circumstance, and Natalie Moore can't come and report on each of those circumstances. So like, how would you say like, man, what's one way or a couple of ways to maybe empower a person that feels that kind of pressure and maybe feels unprepared in the way that you might be prepared?
That's a good question, and I might give an answer that's surprising. And I would say it's okay to be quiet. It's okay to listen. On the extreme side, you have all these corporations who felt like they had to say something. And these things can often feel empty. Like the only corporation that I thought was saying anything really worth listening to was Ben and Jerry's. Everything else was, these platitudes. So people feel like they have to say something. I don't know if anybody watches I May Destroy You on HBO. And I saw an interview with Michaela Cole. And I think she said HBO wanted her to draft something. So like there's this pressure from not every celebrity who's out there saying something. Their handler may be telling them to do that, or their employer. That was pretty insightful for me. You don't, in Twitter especially, makes you feel like you have to say something right away. There are plenty of times where, and I'm not an activist, but there are plenty of times where I am quiet or I log off because it can be overwhelming and your message could get lost. I mean, if you're ever feeling pressured to craft something, I think that is definitely the moment to say, you know what? I don't need to say anything right now, or let me be more thoughtful. Let me give myself, maybe I know what I think in a week or two. And that even happens to me on deadline when everything was happening that weekend of May 31st and June 1st. I was doing some reporting, and then one of the editors was like, well, can you write something? They wanted an essay. And I said, no. It was like, it's still going on. Like, I don't even know what to say that's not going to be perfunctory. And everybody, there's so many think pieces all the time. And it's great that the internet democratizes space. So there's room for people who may not be able to be published to do it in other outlets. But, I'm just a firm believer that it's okay to wait. If you feel like you want to, this is why you have journals, why you have computers. Like if you want to put your thought, every thought doesn't have to be published. And I think we're seeing that with Kamala Harris. right now, no matter how you feel about her. It's like, oh, I mean, this isn't the exact same, but I don't like Beyonce. Not a fan. But when she comes out with something, I don't go on the internet and talk about how I don't like her or what I find problematic. I let the people enjoy themselves. That's not the same as politics, but sometimes it's just, I think we're conditioned where we have to say something all the time. And that's definitely happening this week with Kamala. Yeah, it's okay to reflect and to listen.
Yeah, that's great. What to kind of go back to what you mentioned about Ben and Jerry's and people and large companies speaking out during this time, how has that, what was your reaction to that, or what is your reaction to that, and how would you say that these companies who are now looking to diversify and include, how would you say that your opinion is that they should go about it?
I honestly don't know. What I do know is a lot of times companies may bring in people who make them feel comfortable. And you can talk about these things on a very surface level. If you're really trying to have change, it means that you're going to put people in power and not punish them when they are in power for not conforming to the school of thought that you have. I think probably people of color in these companies don't want any more listening sessions. How do you go beyond the same old, same old? So part of me kind of shrugs, like, I mean, Walgreens, for example, put out a statement on Juneteenth. Walgreens is still closed on 51st in Cottage Grove. So I'm not really interested in Walgreens' statement until they start opening back up in Black neighborhoods. And I keep meaning to take a picture of it and put them on blast on Instagram. That's something that I don't have a problem doing. But I think it's a redistribution of power that has to be done inside these organizations. And really, it's not, what's been curious is it's not the big corporations that have been getting the most attention, because everyone probably knows that they're troubled, but it's arts and nonprofits that I think are taking the biggest hits since George Floyd. Because these are spaces that are seen as progressive or welcoming, and they're not guided as much or driven as much by profit as a company is. So watching this unfold, I didn't expect that those would be the entities that would be feeling the wrath of people.
Right. Yeah. Well, to go back to what you were saying about your current project that you are about to release regarding just COVID and Black and Brown communities, can you speak to that? Can you speak about that project and just kind of how that's overlapped with your current interest in segregation and things like that?
No, I don't want to. I want you all to tune in, so I don't want to give it away.
Just a little skim, a little.
Well, it's focusing on 4 zip codes in Chicago, and it will air all next week. And there's one large digital story that's really like a magazine. It's almost like the length of a book chapter. And we'll be doing a lot of social media on it, Instagram stories, audio diaries, promoting it. So I would, tune in to 91.5 or WBEZ.org. But it's looking at why there are racial disparities and doing a deep dive.
Okay. Awesome. And then in this, what would you say you are learning right now from this moment in this climate?
that people are really willing to blow up the spot on all levels. Like there's just so much being blown up constantly. And it becomes this question, I didn't hear it, but I know Code Switch did an episode about why is it George Floyd that resonated with white people this time around? Like what was it? And they were being sincere in trying to get that answer. I don't know, because I didn't hear that episode, but it is a question. And is it because we have the pandemic going on too? You know, what is it about now? Is it because Trump is in office? I think so much of what is happening in 2020, it's going to be in the history books. And I think we're too close to it right now to have any real, there's analysis that's going on, but I think that there's going to have to be distance to really try to thread this together and get some lessons. So, what am I learning? I think it's just amplifying some of the things that I have known. And also just you can never underestimate racism or this country. Just when you think something else can't happen, like boom, something else comes out of this administration. I think I have been surprised that the pandemic is as politicized as it is. The politicization, I guess, doesn't totally surprise me, but that it's still happening and it's still going this long. And it's also made clear to me that we live in such an individualistic society that we don't really value community or being communal when it comes to the pandemic. Like, okay, you may be fine, but what about others? And is going out, like how are you keeping your community safe? And even people who don't want to vote, voting is also about harm reduction. So if you are, and journalists aren't supposed to get political or tell, but I think that Donald Trump is just so far off that it's okay to talk about racism and talk about why he's unfit for office. Not voting for him is helping him win. And what does that mean for maybe people who are undocumented or women's bodies? Like there's so many things that may not affect you directly, but where is the communal harm reduction that's thought of? And that's something that I'm struggling with people who, even it's not about loving another candidate. It's also, and I also don't know where this purity test started coming in, like when voting for whoever you vote for becomes the stamp on who you are as a person. I hate that's the space that we are in. And no matter how even if you don't like one of the candidates or either of the candidates, what does it mean that you don't see the greater good? So that's, I know that's controversial for people who feel like there has been harm done on the other side, but what's the less harm? And I just think it's disingenuous to think of things as the lesser of two evils, because look what we got this time around. There's no way, no matter if you hated Hillary Clinton, there's no way that we would be going through the things that we're going through now.
Yeah.
I had a question sort of around that, where like obviously your profession as a writer and as a journalist is to literally like tell people what's happening, what has happened. And largely that's seen as, one of those few jobs where you have to remain like as objective as possible and just like present facts. But at the same time, your subject matters are like, it is truth telling in some ways and really needing to, you know, give a specific voice, like, hey, as a Black person from the South Side of Chicago, you need to understand this. And so it's like, how do you, you know, go between like really wanting to express what you actually feel and what you actually think as a person, and then remaining like neutral as a writer and a journalist?
Well, there's no such thing as objectivity. And I tell people that all the time. Like, you want to be fair and you want to be balanced, you want to be accurate and thorough, but we all have our life we're all subjective. We're human beings. So once you throw that out the window, you've made some progress. There is no both sides to segregation. There is no neutral ground in that area. Now, there are certain stories where, now, as a reporter, that doesn't mean that I don't get other voices who may be opposing a development, for example, or in favor of one. You know, you're getting, you're doing the reporting and putting on the record how elected officials may feel or policymakers. So you're not being one-sided in the reporting, but it doesn't mean that you're framing it like they're both sides. And, you know, journalists tell you what to think about, not what to think. So even just by story selection, you are choosing, not a side, but you are highlighting something that doesn't have to show bias, but it's giving a different perspective. So sometimes just the work stands on its own, and it's not about not being objective. So yeah, I think those are the biggest points. But no, like, it's okay to be mad about racism, but if you're covering politics, for example, you still want to, like, if it's on a Trump level, like, for a long time, journalists wouldn't say the word racism or racist. It was like racially charged, racially tinged. It took a long time to come around, but, you know, people should have listened to Black reporters in those newsrooms. Like, that's not being, like, what else does this man have to do to show you that he's racist? So we've kind of moved past that, but you can call people out through data and through their own words without being biased. So someone's asking the thoughts on looting and what I believe the Black community is trying to say to Mayor Lightfoot and CPD. You know, there's so many voices, and I have to watch, even sometimes myself, I might be only hearing from the activists because maybe they're coming up in my feed, or maybe because these are some of the people who are doing work in communities who I'm interviewing. This doesn't directly answer the question, Demi, but as an example, so 6 months ago, defund the police was considered a fringe term. Now it's talked about in the mainstream, and it's just a different discourse that's happening. So after George Floyd and, you know, all this talk about defunding, I did a story about the complicated relationship that Black communities have with the police. And, you know, you just can't do stories that have the Black Lives Matter perspective in them, because there are people in block clubs, there are seniors, there are people who go to the CAPS meetings. Like, it's a lot more nuanced, I mean, nobody wants police brutality, like that's that's common ground, but how do you get at, like, some people do want reform, others just want defund. So it's important to me to try to show that there's not a uniform opinion. So when you ask what I believe the Black community is trying to say, I think there are Black folks who feel like this looting was horrible and that they should be prosecuted, and how this undermines work in our community. You know, there's that perspective. And then there's another perspective that says burn it all to the ground. So it's important to try to get different voices and also not present the Black community as if it's uniform on these issues. And we're seeing that play out with the school votes at high schools on getting officers out.
I've got another question here, and somebody texted it to me. Basically, they said, Chicago is a city whose history is littered in racism, segregation in particular, and the effects of racism are still evident today, possibly more than ever. How important is it that people learn that and unlearn that all racism occurred in the South? Which is interesting because I think that that's something that you like, that's what you've been doing.
It's very important. And even sometimes when stuff happens, you know, people will like, oh, that's the South, they're so backwards. It's like, oh, there was Jim Crow in the North too. It was different. So yeah, like I was saying earlier, like they're like understanding these anti-Black policies passed, and like if you don't understand how these communities were developed, how do you begin to undo that harm? And if your framework is, well, these Black people all live in this neighborhood because they want to and don't understand the history, then you're not going to have an analysis.
Yeah.
I feel like recently there's been a lot of, to speak to this whole idea, people who are just kind of like realizing the lack of progression. I feel like the past 4 years, Trump's whole presidency, there's been a lot of just reporting on this and just centered around this idea of we are not as far as we thought we were, or, you know, we're not as progressive as we thought we were. And a lot of people are coming to terms to that, or coming to terms with that. How can you speak to that idea? And also just to throw in, and can you talk a little bit about your piece that you did on the Red Summer in 1919, and just kind of like the reflection of how we can trace the same things all the way back because we have been ignoring, you know, these consistent areas, redlining and ideas and things that have been shaping our society.
What was the first question again?
Just in general, how can you speak to the progressiveness or lack thereof of progression in this area?
You know, it's a mixed bag. I think there's been progression in criminal justice for sure. You know, with Laquan McDonald, Rekia Boyd, you know, having that consistent pressure and having the mayor switch from Gary McCarthy is great, he's got to go. Not that that fixed everything, but you know, look at John Burge torture survivors and what they were able to get. So activism gets things done in this city and it moves people. You know, getting rid of Anita Alvarez and what Kim Box has tried to do and how she's being attacked for it. You know, and there's some smaller things with housing that are being done or trying to be done, but it's a long road, of course. In the 1919, I co-wrote an audio play for the 100th anniversary of the race riots here in Chicago. And I learned, so I got a deeper understanding of what happened, the aftermath. The report that came out pretty much said you can't have segregation. And the opposite happened. More policies and rules were put into place. So there was a moment when Chicago didn't have to take this route. You know, Chicago was integrated in the beginning of the Great Migration, but then the more Black people started to come, and then after those riots, there was a shift. So we turned it into a piece of drama. Ida B. Wells is in it. Everything that happened is true, but you know, we hired actors and we wrote some words are taken directly from newspapers or from the commission the commission report that came out with the recommendations. But it was a great way to talk about the anniversary and do it in a medium to produce something that shines in the medium that I work in.
I have to add to that because, so I just dropped the link for you guys to check that out. That's the WBEZ link, and you can click right onto it and listen to it. It's about 27 minutes. I listened to that in my car, and I cried. I was so moved by it because for me, it's like you read little paragraphs about stories like that, and oh yeah, I have it logged in my brain. There was riots, 1919. Some kid was out on the lake and, got with the white people. You shouldn't have done that. All right. And that's it, and you don't really go fully into learning how those things happen and how, there was literally riots that spilled into the loop and that it's, affected the way our city is now. Now, when we look at that, it's hard for me to not think that you were that project was borderline prophetic.
I know.
And I know you wouldn't claim that, but when I listen to that, and you'll know what I'm talking about as soon as you listen to it yourself, anybody that's checking this out, we then wake up a year later to actual riots in the actual loop and stuff's on fire. How does that make you feel, having taken a deep dive into a project like that, that's about 100 years ago and riots in the city of Chicago, and now it's 2020, which to me, my whole life has seemed like the most futuristic year that could possibly be. If we ever got our act together, it would be in 2020, but then we see the opposite happening. So how did that make you feel?
I mean, if you were writing this 2020 as a novel, an editor would say you're a little too on the nose, back up, throw some nuance, don't be cliche. I'm still processing, but it is amazing, for lack of a better word. I definitely didn't think the George Floyd death was going to spill out around the country in far-flung places and in Chicago. Some days it feels like Groundhog Day, and the pandemic contributes to that as well. I think I would say overall, stunned is the only word I can really come up with.
And how do you feel about the fact that in a lot of ways, some of the momentum of that has died down? Obviously, we saw, something creep back up with the looting that happened recently. But I mean, for the most part, it's like the intensity definitely isn't what it was 2 months ago. And
no, but I think that we're still living in it. You're not going to have the intensity of that every day where it's that type. I mean, that's just not really sustainable. So I don't feel like it's died. Just because there aren't marches every day doesn't mean that we aren't still living in, as Pastor Otis Moss said in one of his sermons at Trinity, he calls it COVID 1619. That's what I feel like we're living in, where it's this reckoning and a pandemic. So yeah, I don't feel like it's moved on, business as usual. And I don't mean that from the corporation standpoint, but just where we are living. The moment is still very much there to me.
What kind of projects and focus do you hope come out of this? Just from this is what I hope to see in the coming years based on.
Good question.
I hope to see some more equitable policies around housing, like that's and development. You know, when Mayor Lightfoot came in, people were looking to see what she was going to do for CPD and CPS. For me, it was, and rightfully so. For me, it was who was she putting in charge of the Department of Planning and Development and Housing. And those two choices are much different and much more progressive. On these, I mean, the housing commissioner wrote the report about the cost of segregation in this region for the Metropolitan Planning Council. So she understands these issues and understands the cost and the toll and the roadmap that's needed to rectify. Those issues, people pay attention to them, but they aren't as, like you can march for some of the other things a little bit better than the zoning issues for housing. But you know, that said, people were definitely pushing and organizing around housing ordinances in Woodlawn for the Obama Presidential Center. So that has gotten attention, that has gotten movement. So yeah, I would say just policies that are inclusive and open up the city and help to chip away at segregation.
Yeah, for sure.
About the cost of segregation. I know that there's probably no one is aware of what that really means. What, can you speak to that at all?
It's how much segregation costs this region. Like what, like there's an actual number. I'll drop the link.
So you're saying in each region, like in each city, or are you just talking about in Chicago?
Talking about here. My computer is being slow, but this is the name of it. So there was that report, and then there was a roadmap to how to reverse it. What looks like the so if you Google that, it will come up.
Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, I think in our minds, it's like a lot of times we see and hear about segregation and how it still plays a part, but never think about the fact that there would actually be a cost to it, and how that actually affects, you know, literally a city's bottom line and budget.
So a separate question, what do you think, or in your opinion, what does activism look like? So maybe in your field, just in general, what does activism look like for you, to you?
You know, I'm not an activist, so I don't always feel comfortable asking those, you know, that's not my lane. So I want to stay where I am. I would say from a reporter's perspective, the activism that I see that is effective is when it's consistent, and just organized. There are a lot of organizers who aren't organized. Like I've seen that over the years and even in different cities. So the more organized you are, the better your activism is.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I feel like this is definitely one of those seasons and one of those moments where people are really, really trying to figure out where they fit in this whole movement. And honestly, even just what we're doing right now and having this conversation with you, this is definitely even out of the box for what we'd usually do for True Chicago, because a lot of the times, you know, we'd be talking to a photographer or a singer or someone who's, you know, making films. And so, and they would view specifically, hey, I know this one thing that I need to do. So honestly, I wanted to have you on because I think, man, there's so much, it's important to be able to navigate expressing yourself and articulating yourself through words right now, because there's a lot of passion and a lot of times that doesn't translate accurately into words. And I see you do that, you know, regularly and quite easily. So as we kind of wrap up here, is there any sort of parting words or parting words of wisdom that you might give for some of the folks that are, you know, in a place where maybe they do have a community or some sort of platform where people are listening to them?
I would say just always push yourself to grow by reading, by looking at the people who you admire, not being in a bubble with your own work and discovering other work. And also understanding that there's like nothing that anyone is doing is really new under the sun. Like there's some form of these issues that have happened or taken place, and you can put a remix to it, and you know it gets updated. But understand that there are always people who come before you who have done something similar, and yeah, just listen and be open and continue your own education, whatever that looks like. I don't even mean it has to be formal education.
No, that's great. Really appreciate you taking the time with us, Natalie. I would really encourage everybody to check out her book, The South Side. Also check out her piece on, I believe is the piece called City on Fire.
Yes,
Yes.
That's the audio drama.
Yeah, and so I dropped the link in the chat, and then also it sounds like you have something coming out next week, correct?
Yes, my team, the team that I'm on, the Racial Disparities with COVID project.
Is there a time and a place that people can check that out?
No, it'll be all week, and it'll be online also.
Okay, cool. So yeah, if you can head to WBEZ, there'll be everything online, and definitely would love everybody to check that out. So Natalie, thank you so much for being with us. Really,
Thank you, Natalie.
Air high five, clapping, everybody. Just really appreciate you and would love to stay in contact with our True Chicago community.
Great, everyone, you take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Guys, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate everybody for being on. We will be in contact about all of our future programming. Thanks, y'all.